Those in favor? Those against? Ayes have it. I now put clause 2.
No, yeah, thank you.
Mike.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Minister, I had proposed an amendment to clause 2, which would have deleted the proviso, i.e. all the words after annually in the clause, on the basis that given the situation we're living in, the environment and climatic conditions that we face, the prudent thing would be for the fund to be continually built up year by year from what is really a modest contribution from the budget of 400 million as a minimum. Your response to that was saying, well, we have these other arrangements that are satisfactory, so we really don't need to stress the budget out any longer once we reach 10 billion. For the record, I don't think that's a satisfactory response. I think that we should continue to contribute to this fund. I agree with you that times have changed and have shown the importance of discipline around financing of disaster relief. I do commend the government for the efforts it has made over the years with that. I commend Dr. Omar Davis for being instrumental in the establishment of the CRIF as an insurance facility for the region. But we are where we are, and I think that we ought not to say once the thing is at 10 billion that we no longer have to make any further budgetary contributions to it. I mean, for example, the parametric insurance that we have is you can't say it's reliable. I mean, when Beryl hit, we didn't get a cent from the cat bonds, although the damage was very substantial. Your predecessor minister came here and explained the grid and the biometric pressure limits, and that we can't quite qualify. So although we suffered many billions of dollars of damage, way in excess of 10 from Beryl, and indeed there are people still reeling from Beryl who are not fully recovered. You know, we didn't get a cent from the cat bond then. And so I think that one thing we can be sure of is self-reliance. And we ought to make an annual contribution in this era to the fund. And I'm going to propose that amendment that all of the words following the word annually in the new paragraph A, which is in clause 2 of the bill, be deleted.
So, member, we will continue to look to search for different instruments for the fund. Just because the cap bond did not trigger last year in Beryl, that doesn't mean that funds were not flowing in from other instruments. CRIF, there was funds that came from CRIF, there are funds that came from other instruments, and our preferred way as a government is to look for different types of instruments to put into this disaster risk financing framework so that we have surety about what we'll be able to receive.
Minister, I hear you, and I agree 100% that we need to have an array of different sources of relief to deal with natural disasters. And there are credit lines, there are these bonds, there are insurance policies, etc., and there's the budget. Now, the point really is, why are we capping our contributions from the budget? Given that we know that whatever it is, the totality of the coverage that we have is a fraction of the damage that these massive disasters can cause. The physical damage from Melissa has been quantified with reasonable accuracy at, I think, 8.8 billion US. That's a physical damage to Jamaican assets, private and public. Not to mention the non-physical losses, you know, the damage to business and the economy and so on. So the sum of the total of what you're expecting by way of flows for this fund, including the cat bond and the credit lines and the CRIF insurance, etc., is $115 billion, which is not even 1 billion US. So it's not even, it's not even, it's about 15% of the physical losses that the country has sustained. So to say that we're gonna cover it in other ways is really fictional. And that is why I propose the amendment I've proposed. But anyway, the minister is not in favor of it. We can move on.
Minister, if I could.
Prime Minister, your mic is on.
Thank you, Chairman. The leader of the opposition's point is not to be dismissed. And I interpret what he's saying to be that the National Disaster Risk Fund should be at its highest level possible. And nobody argues with that point. But remember the framework that we have, where we have different funds for different levels of risk. So the National Disaster Risk Fund is meant to be your first call, essentially, to deal with what is usually described as low intensity, low risk incidents that occur. And therefore, what the Ministry of Finance is trying to do is to gauge what that kind of low intensity disaster, low risk disaster would be. And then if you go past low intensity disaster, then there is another kind of instrument that addresses it. And I think that they have come up with that framework, which works. So it's not that we don't want the fund to be huge, but remember, when we sequester funds from the consolidated fund, it increases the fiscal pressure because you can't use those funds for anything else other than disaster. So it's a balancing act. And I think that where we are with the threshold that we have set, we have struck the right balance. So it's not to dismiss the validity of the argument, but bear in mind what we have said. Taking funds out of the consolidated funds increases the fiscal pressure, and that there are other instruments and other financial arrangements that can be made to address frequency, intensity, and risk of other disasters.
Mr. Chairman, just for the purpose of accuracy, I just want to make a couple of points in response to the Prime Minister. First of all, we're not talking about modest or small losses here, because in order to draw down any money from this fund, the Fiscal Commission has to certify that the estimated fiscal impact of the disaster is at least 1.5% of GDP, which I think the Minister had indicated is over $50 billion. So we're talking about substantial disasters is what this fund is for. Secondly, all of your matrix or layers go into this fund. So the cat bond proceeds come into the fund, because if you look at paragraph B of 13A, it says all amounts received by the government from the triggering of national disaster instruments held by or on behalf of the government all come in. There are different sources of what goes into this fund to fund the losses. My only point is, I don't see the relevance of saying that once you get to 10 billion from the consolidated fund over time, you no longer have to make the annual contribution to it of $400 million. 400 million Jamaican dollars is what the law says you have to make available each fiscal year to this fund, but it caps it at 10 billion. And what this amendment does, it says, once you reach 10 billion, you no longer have to make those contributions. I'm just questioning that the sense of that, or the prudence of that in the era in which we live. I only made this point in response to yours because I just wanted to make it clear the overall parameters of how this fund works.
So Mr. Chairman, thank you again for allowing me. So again, once we are taking out of the consolidated fund, taking out of revenues that we have earned, and we are locking it off in a fund, it's no longer available for anything else. And therefore, we have to manage the fiscal pressures that will arise if we keep taking out of the consolidated fund to locking it off in specific and special funds. That's the consideration that we ask the House to bear in mind.
Minister, are we going to take the amendment? I now put clause 2. Those in favor?
Mr. Chairman, I am putting an amendment. I'm proposing an amendment to the bill. And the amendment I've articulated very clear. I'm saying delete from clause 2 in the new paragraph A all words following the word annually. Put the amendment and you can.
She's ready. We'll